You used to be able to see hundreds of bats flying around, eating insects, and now you'll be lucky to see one or two.
If you back up 20 years, nobody knew anything about bats, generally speaking. The general public knew very little except that they were afraid of them, they were creepy, blind, rabid, and none of that is really true. They're very clean, they spend half the day grooming each other, they all have eyes. Very, very, very few of them are rabid, and they're not mice with wings. I think bats are interesting for the average person for many reasons, including the fact that out of the 5,000 or so mammals that exist on this planet, about 1,500 of them are bats. People don't know that. They think, there's like 10, 12 species. But, you've got some countries where you've got 150 different species of bats. So they are the second most numerous mammal in terms of species after rodents. There are no other mammals that fly. There are mammals that can glide. There are mammals that can parachute, but no mammals that have powered flight like birds.
Because they fly, they have such strict energy demands, and they have to eat an enormous amount, and so the bats that we study here in the United States all eat insects. And so they have to consume a tremendous amount of insects, and that makes them very interesting, but also makes them very important to study because the insects that they're consuming are otherwise pests. White nose syndrome is caused by a fungus that grows on the skin of bats and can invade that skin, eating into it while the bats are hibernating. The fungus can't survive warm temperatures, so it's only while the bats are hibernating that the fungus can grow on them. Hibernation is something that a lot of different animals use in order to conserve energy. There's two major types of hibernation. There's daily hibernation, which we call torpor. Then there's true hibernation, which bats also use to get through the long energy bottleneck that they face, and that hibernation allows them to conserve energy. The fungus, when it's invading the skin of the bats, is disrupting their normal physiology. So the bats will normally stay hibernating during the whole winter, only arousing every 2 weeks or so, but the fungal infection causes the bats to respond to that infection as you would normally respond to a skin infection, and that consumes more energy more quickly. And the bats run out of energy before there's insects available in the spring. White nose first was recognized in the winter of 2006-2007, and one of the most obvious characteristics was they had this powdery white fungus growing on them. And some researchers became concerned because there was a lot of bats dying in these particular caves outside of Albany, New York. And within the bat research community, it was recognized within a year that this was a major problem. So it was within 2 years that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started to take this disease very seriously. And that's when things became clear that this was a huge problem for bats and that it would likely affect humans as well, because the numbers of bats that were being wiped out was just astronomical. We can have mortalities as high as 98% in some species, in some colonies. By 2012, it was estimated that 5 million bats had died, and we can only imagine how many more millions have died since then. The fungus can only survive at cold temperatures, which means it can survive in the caves and mines even once the bats leave. But then in the fall, when they go back into hibernation, the fungus is there waiting for them. And the bats, during the fall, will migrate from one cave or mine to another, and that will help spread it. If you watch a video of a group of bats hibernating, you'll see that there's a lot of contact between those bats. And so one infected bat, you can imagine, can easily contaminate all the other bats that it's hibernating with. White nose syndrome is a unfortunately, a good example of the kind of disease that is becoming more common due to increased worldwide travel.
Nobody did this on purpose. We had an American caver probably go to Europe, pick this up on their gear or clothes, bring it back. Or it was a European caver had stuff on their clothes, they brought it over here. So it was done innocently. But now there's this realization that you can move this fungus from cave to cave, and bats can do it as well.
It's almost impossible to prevent the inadvertent transmission of some diseases around the world.
This has been a real problem. It's arguably the greatest threat to North American wildlife in history. We drove the passenger pigeon to extinction and several other species since Columbus. But this is one that we're living it now, so we don't know for sure if there are going to be extinctions or not. You know, right now, white nose affects 7 different cave hibernating bats. The potential is there to lose species.
One of the things that I've seen in the 6 years that I've been working on this disease is that there's been a lot of effort at trying to develop treatments or cures for the disease. And some of these have succeeded in blocking growth of the fungus, for example, or killing the fungus. Much of the time, this works very well in a petri dish or in a controlled laboratory setting or on a few animals. But when it's tried in a larger scale or tried to treat a whole hibernacula, it doesn't work as well. Anything that requires you to handle each bat individually and provide it some kind of treatment or a vaccination we looked into at one point isn't going to be practical to treat the millions of bats that are at risk.
It's really important that people increase public awareness about this problem. And it's a growing problem. It's not going away. You know, if you don't hear about it, that doesn't mean that we're not adding states every month, it seems. In a sense, they're preparing for the worst, and unfortunately, that's probably a good thing to do. It's sweeping westward across the Mississippi now, and now there's really nothing to stop it from heading to the West Coast.
We can imagine that as the world becomes smaller and we have more and more connectedness between different populations, that we will see more problems like this.